Wow, Sophie, I did not expect for you to take personal responsibility for the assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy. I had always blamed it on Lee Harvey Oswald. Now,
actually,
Sophie,
that's a lie. You have blamed it on a lot of people.
I know, and it's possible someone might say that I'm just blaming yet another person for the assassination of JFK. But really, what I'm trying to let people know is that Sophie can land 3 shots within a roughly dinner plate size target at a surprising distance.
Also, moving target.
Moving target too. You've got to lead that. Very impressive. I believe in you, Sophie. I believe in your ability to take out John Fitzgerald Kennedy if you'd had to. You know?
That's why we've built you this time machine.
If he was coming at you with his limousine and you were sheltering in a book depository, I think you could have done it.
Thanks.
Welcome back to Behind the Bastards.
Way too powerful.
I didn't know how to introduce this one, so I decided to blame Sophie for a historical crime. I am Robert Evans. This is a podcast ostensibly about the worst people in all of history. We are getting behind some bastards because all right-wing politics today is rooted in the series of conspiracy theories that we are explaining right now for you in 300-ish years of history, condensed into, I don't know, like 5 podcast episodes. Anyway, my guests to continue this glorious journey in part 4 are Margaret Killjoy.
Hello.
And Garrison Davis.
Good morning, or afternoon, or some other time.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it's whatever time of day you're listening to. So, folks, here we are. Let's get back into the story. For the next year or so after the Kennedy assassination, conspiracies around Kerry kind of flared and then eventually seemed to subside. His friend Greg moved back to New Orleans. Greg kind of was back and forth between Whittier and New Orleans. You know, it is being young. You can't, make rent for a while. You move back in with your parents, then you come back. It's life. And once he comes back to the city, the two start work on their long-shelved plans to create a satiric religion based on the Greek goddess of chaos, Eris. Now, Gary wrote most of the first draft of a tract that would later become... This is a little bit before zines were a thing, but it also is kind of a proto-zine, and its title is Principia Discordia, or How I Found the Goddess and What I Did to Her When I Found Her. And this is... It's a good title. These guys are very funny. And it is kind of framed as, it's a mix of like a religious tract. And, actually what it's kind of framed as, when I told you about how that illuminated member of the Illuminati got struck by lightning and found by the cops. A lot of the Principia Discordia kind of has the feeling of like intercepted communications from this like weird underground cult. And that's intentional. They know the history that I related to you all in the first, in fact, are quite knowledgeable about the history that I related to you all in the opening episodes of this series. Aspects of it are kind of framed as a religious tract. And the faith that this is a tract for is called Discordianism. Now, by this point, Kerry had already started reading guys like Max Stirner, and he had found himself pulled out of his objectivist trend of his Ayn Rand support and towards a sort of individualist anarchism. Stirner is a guy who wrote a book called The Ego and Its Own, and I am not the person to summarize that egoism is one of the things that like that kind of anarchism is called. I am not the person to summarize it to you, but the main impact it has on Kerry is that he finds himself pulled towards anarchism. As opposed to this kind of, and he'd always been an anti-state guy, right? That is a thing that is pretty consistent. And that's a thing that he believes when he considers himself a capitalist revolutionary. The main thing that Stirner does for him is he drops the capitalism, right? And is just kind of now anti-state. And he and Greg are also getting increasingly interested in the occult in this period of time. Kerry does a pass on the Principia Discordia, and then they start mailing it off to an ever-expanding group of their friends, who are mostly artists and weirdo pranksters who all like the idea of a religion centered around chaos. By the mid-1960s, American conspiracy culture had taken off to new heights, thanks to the Kennedy assassination and all that shit that was going on with UFOs. Conspiracism is also taking off increasingly among the right wing, too. And the conservative political establishment is starting to have its first big break away from what you might call consensus reality, which is existing and accepting a plane of basic reality that is similar, or if not basically identical, to the ones that the liberals accept, and towards a darker splinter reality defined by conspiracism. And the author of this switch, probably the single figure most responsible for the splintering of the reality tunnels in mainstream American politics, is a guy named Robert H. Welch Jr., who we have talked about on this show. He is the founder of the John Birch Society. Now, again, if you want to listen to those episodes on Bob Welch that we do with the Knowledge Fight guys, I do recommend them. But in case you haven't heard those, or you're just rusty on the subject of the John Birch Society, I'm going to quote from our friend Hofstadter again, who wrote The Paranoid Style in American Politics in November of 1964. So that article that I quoted to you earlier that talked about the Illuminati and its influence on kind of conspiracism in America earlier, like 2 episodes ago, that article was written during the period we're talking about right now, November of 1964.
Wild. Wow.
Yeah. A few years ago, Welch proclaimed that communist influences are now in almost complete control of our government. Note the care and scrupulousness of that almost. He has offered a full-scale interpretation of our recent history in which communists figure at every turn. They started a run on American banks in 1933 that forced their closure. They contrived the recognition of the Soviet Union by the United States in the same year, just in time to save the Soviets from economic collapse. They have stirred up fuss over segregation in the South. They have taken over the Supreme Court and made it one of the most important agencies of communism, right? That's how Hofstadter described this, is where, and that is what, if you replace communism with the Illuminati, it's the same kind of shit that people were saying after the French Revolution, right? It's the same playbook, and it very much is a playbook for a lot of these people. In the early 1960s, Welch came across a pair of books that had a massive influence on him. And these books were Nesta Webster's Secret Societies and Subversive Movements from 1924, and American evangelist Gerald Winrod's book, Adam Weishaupt, A Human Devil, from 1935.
Okay, that is a banger title.
Dude, if anybody writes a book about me, Robert Evans, A Human Devil, I will be the proudest I'm capable of being. What an honor.
I had a satanic scare at the last place I lived with like a local news person about one of my music videos. And so we just printed up the next band shirt was just all of the like axe wielding terrorist women, Antifa anarchists sacrificing babies in the woods or whatever.
That's how you do it. So both of these books, and this is going to really shock you guys, were profoundly anti-Semitic.
What?
And this is kind of the start of a European school of thought that saw Jews and the Illuminati, and in some cases the Freemasons, as like co-authors of the French and Bolshevik revolutions together. That like this is all tied together, and this is a big part. Hitler is espousing aspects of this. He's talking to if you like look at what Hitler actually said about the conspiracies he believed, he would often call it Judeo-Bolshevism. Right? Hitler's not so much into the Illuminati stuff, but the stuff Hitler believes is very much descendant from a lot of this stuff. So Welch jettisoned the anti-Semitism he found in these books, some of it at least, but he kept the rest, particularly the obsession with a grand Illuminati conspiracy theory. And I'm going to quote now from the book The World of the John Birch Society. Welch's first public mention of the Illuminati, but not yet the insiders, came in his More Stately Mansion speech, delivered before a crowd of 1,700 at the Conrad Hilton in Chicago on June 5th, 1964. He told his biographer that although he had been studying this subject for a number of years prior to this, he understood that you couldn't start putting it all out in one go because nobody would believe you. Instead, he'd endeavored to lead the Birch Society's members little by little to where they would be interested. Despite these concerns, Welch's idea of the insiders was quickly incorporated into the Society's official worldview, with Birch writers like Medford Evans musing about whether Dean Rusk was the insiders' quarterback, for example. But just as often, the conspirators continued to be identified as the communists, the liberals, the establishment, the liberal establishment, or simply the conspiracy. The seeming interchangeability of the terms reflected the fact that, appearances to the contrary notwithstanding, Welch's turn to the Illuminati hadn't really changed his basic analysis. So that's interesting. Number one, Welch is kind of doing a little bit of an Adam Weishaupt with his society, right? Where he's like, well, you can't tell everyone the whole truth at once. You have to kind of like lead them there. But he comes to believe in these Illuminati conspiracies, that they're behind, the French Revolution and the Bolshevik Revolution and all of these social justice movements. But he also consciously loops them in with both this, blaming it on insiders, right? The Illuminati are the insiders, and you might call them the deep state, But he identifies them in the same breath as not just the communists, but also the liberal establishment, right? All of this is the conspiracy. All of this linked together is the conspiracy the right is going to believe in from 1964 up to today. In November of 19... Huh?
Oh, it's so based on anti-Semitism in terms of the way that, like, people think of anti-Semitism as, like, racism, but confusing because applied to this group of people that's often white. But it's like, it's not. It's just this entirely different system of oppression that's based on this, I don't know. This belief in this fucking secret rulers. It's based on
this. It's based on this belief that there is a fragment of society within your society that is different and fundamentally is trying to push all of these modernizing elements for sinister reasons, right? Yeah. Of their own power, right? Yeah, totally. That is the core of anti-Semitic belief, and it is focused obviously on the Jews being that fragment. But once you start to believe that, it's not hard for you to move on to just like, well, beyond that, it's the Illuminati. Right. It's the communists, it's the liberals establishment, all of these different, like, you've accepted that there's this, that any sort of movement towards a progressing society is based in a conspiracy to destroy it, right? And that's the most important step to take.
And it also, it goes the other direction too. Now that you get people to believe in lizard people or whatever other Illuminati thing, you can then get them to also just become anti-Semitic.
Yes, it works backwards and forwards. Again, it's very syncretic, too. So people who are just convinced that there's lizard people or Bigfoot or UFOs, if you loop that into like, well, the Illuminati doesn't want you to know about Bigfoot or the UFOs, right? Yeah. And they're keeping that, then that is also an inroad to get those people believing that the Jews are behind everything bad in society. This is a pretty durable and proven thing that happens within conspiracism.
Yeah.
In November of 1966, roughly a year after the publication of the Principia Discordia, Bob Welch published an essay in a John Birch magazine titled The Truth in Time, in which he revealed his discovery of a master conspiracy older than communism. The communist movement is only a tool of the total conspiracy. As secret as the communist activities and organizations generally appear, they are part of an open book compared to the secrecy enveloping some higher degree of this diabolic force. The extrinsic evidence is strong and convincing that by the beginning of the 20th century, there had evolved an inner core of conspiratorial power, able to direct and control subversive activities, which were worldwide in their reach, incredibly cunning and ruthless in their nature, and brilliantly farsighted and patient in their strategy. Whether or not this increasingly all-powerful hidden command was due to an unbroken continuation of Weishaupt's Illuminati, or was a distillation from the leadership of this and other groups, we do not know. Some of them may never have been communists, while others were. To avoid as much dispute as possible, therefore, let us call this ruling clique simply the insiders.
It's just people falling for the bait, thinking that they're smart.
Yeah, and Bob Welch is both high on his own supply, but also recognizes this is a good way to manipulate people. And it's interesting, 1964 is Welch's first mention of the Illuminati, whereas like, I've got to prep the ground for people. 1966 is where he comes out with his big speech talking about the Illuminati. 1965 is when the Principia Discordia gets published. It is, all of this
we should say that the Principia Discordia has a decent section in it about the Illuminati.
Yes, I'm about to get to that. Yeah, we will be reading from it right now. Yeah. So, the Principia Discordia was written for people like Greg and Kerry, because it was written by people like Greg and Kerry, right? Intelligent, well-read weirdos on the fringes of society who are natural skeptics, but who are also drawn irresistibly towards conspiracism. It's fitting that Chapter 1, authored by Kerry and attributed to his pseudonym, Lord Omar Khayyam Ravenhurst, was called The Epistle to the Paranoids. It is essentially a message to the counterculture of the 1960s. And at this point, as he's had his sort of break into anarchism, he's finding himself increasingly angry that the objectivists, where he'd formerly kind of like found identification, and the Marxists, who he'd once identified with, and the anarchists, who he now identified with, all hated each other and were all fighting each other rather than fighting the state, right? And the paranoids, that's who he's talking about, is these people on the counterculture who are all in opposition to the state, but who can't get along with each other. And this message in the Principia Discordia is essentially a message to this fragmented chunk of the counterculture that he was like, you guys are fighting too much to oppose the state in a meaningful way. And I'm going to read a quote from that now. And this is, again, the Epistle to the Paranoids. Number 1, ye have locked yourselves up in cages of fear, and behold, do you now complain that ye lack freedom? Ye have cast out your brothers for devils, and now complain ye, lamenting that ye been left to fight alone. All chaos was once your kingdom. Verily held ye dominion over the entire pentaverse. But today ye was sore afraid in dark corners, nooks, and sinkholes. Oh, how the darknesses do crowd up, one against the other in ye hearts. What fear ye more than that what ye hath wroughten? Verily, verily, I say unto you, not all the sinister ministers of the Bavarian Illuminati, working together in multitudes, could so entwine the land with tribulation as have your baseless warnings.
Are you just trying to talk shit on Twitter?
Yeah, that's not a thing that anyone involved in radical politics today would identify with on a deep and emotional level, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's well written too. I find a lot in this piece. Now, the next section of the Principia was an ad, and it's framed as an advertisement, as like a hokey 60s style advertisement to join the Bavarian Illuminati, which is listed as the world's oldest and most successful conspiracy. Greg and Kerry give their version of Illuminati history here, which puts the creation of the organization at around 1090 by Hassan Isaba, a medieval warlord credited with creating an order of Hashvet-fueled assassins. People get the exact history on that quite a lot wrong. Obviously, Hassan Isaba had nothing to do with the Illuminati, and they knew this. This was a joke for them, right? The advertisement is very tongue-in-cheek. It also references H.P. Lovecraft's creation, Yog Sothoth, as well as Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Among other things, the Principia is a satire of real cults, but also a satire of American mass media. And in fact, that ad to join the Bavarian Illuminati ends with these lines. If your IQ is over 150 and you have $3,125 plus handling, you might be eligible for a trial membership. If you think you qualify, put the money in a cigar box and bury it in your backyard. One of our underground agents will contact you shortly. I dare you, tell no one. Accidents have a strange way of happening to people who talk too much about the Bavarian Illuminati. May we warn you against imitations. Ours is original and genuine.
Didn't Jamie do a podcast about this?
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, there's some Mensa mixed up in there, right? Yeah. There's also like Coca-Cola ads, kind of like this is the original flavor, you know? Yeah. They're making fun of all this stuff.
Speaking of advertisements that will instruct you to bury your money and throw it away. Mm-hmm. Here are our ads that
God, I hope it's a gold ad. I wish for each of you a gold ad at this point. We're back. So one thing that becomes clear going through the Principia and by the way, you can pronounce the Principia Discordia however you want, because nobody actually knows how ancient Latin was pronounced in its entirety. We have ecclesiastic Latin, which is a bit different. So if you want to be like, you can pronounce it that way, you can go fuck yourself. I took 3 years of Latin. I'll say it however the fuck I goddamn want. Go to hell. I love you. Don't study Latin in high school, kids. It's all wasted time.
I did too. I also look at us. We are such a bunch of suckers.
I know. Absolutely. My friends are all like learning Spanish that they then travel with, and I'm stuck there learning about how fucking Caecilius and his buddy
I had it helped me have a
Unbelievable.
conversation with my nun aunt about whether or not you pronounce Latin certain ways. That's what I got out of 3 years of Latin.
We just did some episodes on Bobby Fischer, and some people thought I was intending to just kind of joke about the fact that he was a nerd, because I was also a nerd, which is why I brought up Warhammer so much. But I took 3 years of Latin so that I could understand all of my Warhammer books.
Oh my God.
That was why I did that.
Hell yeah.
So there you go. Anyway, whatever. One thing that becomes clear going through the Principia and doing all this research on the Illuminati is how knowledgeable Greg and Kerry and their other friends were about the actual history, not just of the Illuminati, but of other secret societies and conspiracies. These guys have like an academic level understanding of this history, which is why they are able to parody it so successfully. The Principia contains a number of letters in which members of the Illuminati, all of which are like, and they take, as did, we didn't really get into this in those, but all of the original Illuminati people like took on pseudonyms that were like themed after ancient Greek and Roman history, like Achilles and Ajax and stuff. And all of the new Illuminati, the Discordians, take on pseudonyms as well. As I said, Kerry's is Lord Omar Khayyam Ravenhurst. Greg Hill's is Malaclips the Younger. And yeah, they give, so these guys are very much consciously like aping Adam Weishaupt. And in their conspiracy document that they put out, they each provide kind of different and often contrasting theories about the actual age and origin of the Illuminati. Usually this winds up stretching back to prehistory, and they're kind of continuing Weishaupt's lie here, right? Like consciously continuing, because like he would pretend it was an ancient society. They're doing this intentionally. And it also includes bits like this, which are clearly satirizing the John Birch Society. Your publication is timely, so mention that in addition, and this is part of like a section of it that's framed as like intercepted letters, basically, right? Your publication is timely, so mention that in addition to the old fronts like the Masons, the Rothschild banks, and the Federal Reserve System, we now have significant control of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, since Hoover died last year, but that is still secret. The Students for a Democratic Society, the Communist Party USA, the American Anarchist Association, the Junior Chamber of Commerce, the Black Lotus Society, the Republicans Party, the John Dillinger Died for You Society, and the Campfire Girls. It is still useful to continue the sham of the Birchers that we are seeking world domination, so do not reveal that political and economic control was generally complete several generations ago.
It's so funny. It's so good.
Yeah, this is a response to the John Birch Society as much as it is anything else, and they're fucking with people, right? Like, that's what's going on here.
Okay, but
so
wait, was there a Campfire Girls, or did they make that up?
Yeah. That was like a Girl Scouts kind of analog that may still exist for all I know. I'm not a Campfire Girls expert, although soon we'll have our 6-part series on the Campfire Girls. I mean, if I have to lie to write it.
You already did the Boy Scouts, so
yeah, we could have done a couple more episodes on the fucking Boy Scouts.
Yeah.
So they write this silly zine, and I know some of you who are not like as into this stuff as all three of us are probably like, why are we talking about like this weird joke that some dudes made in the mid 60s?
Oh boy.
Trust me, it matters. So they write this weird zine. And if you know anything about kind of like pre-internet era zines, you know that the thing they're going to need next is a photocopier. Now, in the mid 1960s, photocopiers existed. You could get access to them. But they, like, owning one would have cost, probably like what a car does today. It was not easy to get, like, to purchase one. Most people didn't have access to one unless they had access through an institution. And so if you were going to use such a machine, you either were, like, at a school that had one, or you had maybe an employer that had one, and you could kind of, like, get some time on it. So it just so happened that Greg Hill, when they decide they want to start making a bunch of copies of this thing they hand out, Greg Hill had a friend named Lane Kaplinger. And Lane worked as a secretary for New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison. If you've ever watched the movie JFK by Oliver Stone, Garrison is the guy played by Kevin Costner. So he would go on to write the first major Kennedy assassination conspiracy book titled On the Trail of Assassins, which is what Stone's JFK was based on. This will be relevant soon. So Greg Hill and his friend sneak into Jim Garrison's office, and they use the photocopier to produce several copies of the Principia Discordia, which they start handing out to friends who read it and find it funny. Now, these people then...
I will say, as someone who is also interested in this history, this claim is heavily disputed.
Yes, we know there's at least one zine they did use Garrison's photocopier on. It's not provable that it was the Principia Discordia.
Well, and they also claim that the first copy of the Principia was typed out using Garrison's typewriter.
Yes.
There's a lot of weird claims about Garrison, specifically because of his involvement in the JFK stuff.
Well, he's the one who wrote it.
Oh, not just that. You're right, Garrison. This may not have happened. We do know that they used, because they were writing other zines. It's pretty well known that they used his photocopier for one thing a couple of years prior to this. There have been claims since that they used it for this. And like you said, that they used his typewriter. We don't know what's true because these guys, again, part of what they're about to start doing is telling a bunch of funny lies. So
that's so good.
That said, it is known that Hill and a friend got access to his photocopier at one point, right? Okay. I chose to tell people the version that I found most funny, which I thought was in line with Discordian traditions. But yes, that is good. That is useful context. So they start handing this stuff out to friends. And in the way that things spread back then, these people read it. A lot of them like it. They find their own access to like mimeograph machines or whatever. They go to the library. They start making copies of it and handing it out to friends. And in a couple of different cities, people decide to start Discordian chapters, which are themed as both kind of secret societies and sects of a religion. That's like what they are consciously aping. But in reality, it has a lot more in common with like modern nerd subculture today. And to kind of go through this process, I'm going to quote now from the book KLF by an author named J.M.R. Higgs. Slowly, Hill and Thornley recruited a few like-minded friends into their new religion. Their aim was to undermine existing belief systems by spreading confusion and disinformation with as much humor as possible. To this end, they each adopted a host of new names under which their Discordian endeavors were credited. Many new Discordian chapters were founded. The majority of these contained only one member, and some contained none. Discordians then wrote essays and letters under these aliases, only to follow them with completely contradictory essays and letters under a different alias. So this is like becomes sort of the first act of worship of the Discordian church, is to like write essays and letters about conspiracies and then send them out to different magazines and different publications under a variety of aliases. Now, as for the actual religion itself,
we all know you actually meant aliens.
I did. Which, my book on the Illuminati by that one crank does talk a lot about the Anunnaki. Apparently the Babylonians talked about them all the time. So, no one's more credible than the Babylonians. But the actual tenets of the Discordian faith, which is, again, a satire of religion, there's a variety of things. Everybody's a pope, which is not an original thing. Initially, it is actually very centralized. It's kind of one of the big changes in the Discordian faith over the years is the decision that everybody gets to be a pope. They don't have religious dogmas. They have katmas, which are like relative meta-beliefs rather than like strict beliefs in something, right? There's kind of a general prescription in the Discordian church against believing too hard in anything. Like every religion, they have foods that you're banned kind of arbitrarily from eating. In this case, it's hot dog buns. And so there's a lot of just like hot dogs handed out at like Discordian events in this period of time. And again, this is meant to be, it's meant to be, she would love this. It's a joke. It's yucks. But what you should have realized right now by the passage I read earlier, where they're spreading all these jokes, but they're also spreading all of these different claims about the things they've done as a conspiracy. What Hill and Thornley particularly have done, is create a series of memes, which start to spread through the underground media of the day, through this kind of growing underground network of what's going to become zine culture. Now, because this faith gets founded in 1965, right as the Kennedy assassination conspiracy theories pick up steam, conspiracy theories become sort of the language that Discordians choose to do their messaging in. Now, This is what brings us to Playboy magazine. The mid to late...
Side note, a place Jamie Loftus worked.
Mm-hmm. She did. She's deeply tied to all these
Jamie is involved in this.
That explains so much.
We are through the looking glass here, people.
Oh my gosh.
When I say Playboy today, you either think of all of Hugh Hefner's many sex crimes, or you think about, that like website or that magazine that used to be big and is no longer profitable and turned into like kind of a sleazy internet brand. In the 1960s, Playboy is hugely influential in the counterculture, not just because there's pictures of attractive naked people, but because like of the articles. Like there are a lot of very influential writers.
I read it for the
Playboy.
articles.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
This is a thing. And two of the guys who are writing it for the articles are a pair of editors for Playboy magazine named Robert Shea and Robert Anton Wilson.
Oh my God, I had no idea.
There's so many fucking Roberts.
Yeah. There's a lot of Roberts involved in this story too. But yes, Bob Shea and Robert Anton Wilson are both editors for Playboy magazine.
Wow.
And they're both kind of into a lot of the same stuff that Kerry and Greg are. They find the occult. They're both very much into the occult, especially Robert Anton Wilson. They are taking huge amounts of LSD. And by the way, so are Hill and Thornley by this point. And, they start to notice, because Playboy publishes letters. And one of the easiest places for Discordians who are writing these nonsense conspiracy letters to get their shit published is Playboy. And Robert Anton Wilson and Robert Shea start to notice, like, we're getting a lot of weird letters from guys writing about the Illuminati and Eris and stuff. That's peculiar. So they start responding to some of these letters. Wilson, being a prankster himself, decides he's going to fuck with whoever is sending him these joke letters by publishing all of the weirdest ones. And his particular thing is in each issue, he likes to publish conspiracy theories, letters that are conspiracy theories that specifically contradict each other, like incompatible theories about the Kennedy assassination and stuff like that. Because he thinks that's funnier, and it is. And I'm going to quote now from a summary by a writer named James Burt. Wilson said he did not consider this a prank or a hoax, but guerrilla ontology. He became increasingly exasperated with the fixed views on both the right and left of politics, and he wanted people to question the information they received, to stop seeing their beliefs as inherently true. Now, ontology is a branch of philosophy that studies, among other things, the nature of reality, like what is true, right? Again, this is a philosophy discussion on a podcast, so we're flattening things here, but that's the basic of it, right? It is the science of like what is, how to classify and explain objects and entities. Wilson and Shea, like the Discordians, saw themselves as waging a necessary war against people's widely accepted definitions of reality. And they are looking out at millions of people being massacred in Vietnam, at police in the street beating civil rights marchers, and they are responding to what they see as all of the people perpetuating these crimes have locked themselves into what Robert Anton Wilson will later call a reality tunnel, which is this like very solidified belief about the nature of the world that is wrong but justifies violence because the world itself will not conform to this errant belief. And so if you can't accept anything else as real, you're going to do violence on the people who insist in living in a way that does not conform to that belief you have about the world. So the thing Wilson and Shea want to do is soften people's understanding of what reality is in the hope that it will stop a lot of this horrible shit from happening, right? That's the goal, okay?
Okay.
This is not going to work out perfectly, but it's you understand where they're coming from, right?
Yeah, I mean,
I do at least.
I do. I feel like sometimes we think that like, oh, we'll use sarcasm and parody and irony. I feel like people who are versed in the internet will know why this doesn't work.
Yes.
You know?
And the spoiler is that it doesn't.
Yeah.
But you know what does work, Margaret?
The exchange of money for items.
Oh, I was going to say advertising.
Oh.
It has a more profound impact on human cognition than almost anyone understands. And in fact, in the future, will be considered to be a health hazard on the same level as cigarette smoking. But for now, it's what keeps podcasts on the air. So enjoy your information hazard, everybody. We're back. And have your kids considered the benefit of smoking Pall Malls? Pall Malls aren't just the tastiest cigarette on the market. They're the cigarette that has an extra long filter, which helps those tiny hands grasp it and smoke safely.
Asked Chris to cut it.
What? Sophie, you don't want kids to hear the good news about Pall Mall cigarettes? The cigarette crafted with tiny hands in mind? By tiny hands?
I thought you were a Camel guy.
Okay.
I'm hurt.
Look, one of the tragic lessons about advertising is that sometimes people consume different products than they advertise.
Yeah, fair enough.
Mm-hmm.
Just like I actually kind of more into silver.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's like, I talk about how LASIK provided me with laser eye surgery, but the reality is that I lashed a banshee to the
I have to
a
cut
rock
this
in
too.
my backyard.
Can you just do your job?
What? Sophie, I can't talk about how I trained a banshee to fix my eyes?
No.
With the ice, okay, whatever. Sophie, Jesus. Unfair. Anyway, Discordians. So Robert Anton Wilson and Robert Shea start publishing all of these weirdo letters by these weirdo Discordians and eventually realize something is going on here, that it's not just an increasing number of crazy people sending them conspiracy theories.
But a conspiracy of conspiracists.
Yeah, exactly. And Robert Anton Wilson, when he finds this out, is so on board. He's like, this is the best thing I've ever heard of. And he travels and he meets with Kerry Thornley in 1967. And as soon as Thornley explains the game to him, Robert Anton Wilson becomes a Discordian. He is immediately on board with all of this shit. Now, some other stuff is happening while all of these figures are meeting. At this point in time, a book called The Second Oswald has been published, which is the first organized conspiracy theory about a second gunman on the grassy knoll. And
who's
at
Kerry?
The same time, through this, yes, it comes out in this book that Kerry Thornley, this weird countercultural figure, has ties to all of these people adjacent to the conspiracy in the Second Oswald. And the nature of this coincidence that he's just sort of tied to all these people that this book has argued were helping to carry out the assassination is too much for a lot of people. And a growing chunk of the conspiracy culture of the time convinces itself that Thornley was the second gunman. In some versions of the conspiracy, he's like an Oswald double who is there to distract from the fact that there's multiple Oswalds, basically, right? And a lot of people, because Thornley looks like Oswald and knows him, think that he's the second Oswald, right? One of the people who decides this is what's happened, one of the people who comes to believe this about the Kennedy assassination, is Jim Garrison, the DA of New Orleans.
Oh.
So Garrett, yeah.
That's not going to work out well.
That's not going to work out well for anybody. Garrison. Hi, Garrison.
This is going to get so complicated.
I know. All of our names, except for Margaret, so far have been deeply implicated in this conspiracy. So, Jim Garrison starts investigating Kerry Thornley in January of 1968, right after Kerry and Bob Wilson meet. And he actually subpoenas Kerry Thornley so he can ask Kerry about his relationship with Oswald. Now, Thornley denies that he had been in any contact with the assassin in any manner since 1959, but Garrison comes to believe that Thornley is part of the conspiracy and acted as a body double for Oswald. And he also finds out that Oswald moved to New Orleans right after Thornley, and that the year before the assassination, they were both in Mexico City at the same time. So he charges Kerry with perjury. This is a years-long fight Kerry has with a perjury charge over lying about his associations with Lee Harvey Oswald. And this is a very situation. Kerry had actually been called in. A lot of people don't know this. Kerry Thornley testified to the Warren Commission in 1964 because he had published his book, The Idle Warriors, which was about Lee Harvey Oswald. And all he's talking about in the Warren Commission stuff is what he knew about Oswald, right? But because he says he had no more contact with him, this is a really, you can get in shitloads of trouble for lying in a congressional inquiry like this, right? You are not allowed to do that. Well, so the fact that they're...
Well, and a year after he testified, he also released a book just titled Oswald.
Yes.
The same exact year that the Principia was first being distributed.
Well, it's just a cash grab, I assume, right?
Because if I'm not mistaken, when because he becomes convinced after a while, I believe that Oswald
Oh, right, was innocent.
He starts believing that Oswald was innocent, and then he comes to believe that Oswald did it, and he eventually comes to believe something very similar to what Jim Garrison believes, but he writes the book Oswald kind of in the middle of all of these beliefs.
Okay.
Because he knows the guy, and so Kerry starts to get very paranoid at this point, because in the middle of creating a religion about secret societies where they claim to be the Illuminati pulling the strings, he has also become the center of the JFK assassination conspiracy theory and is now being charged with perjury.
This is what we call a fuck around and find out moment.
Yes, yeah. One of the
Don't
things
spend
he becomes
a year
convinced of
putting up flyers asking for a president to be assassinated if you don't want people to think you might have done it.
Mm-hmm. Now, you remember back when that Nazi paid him to do research on the Hitler book?
Oh, God.
Yes.
Okay.
So the book is titled, I think it's like Hitler Was Not a Bad Guy, right?
Yeah.
Kerry becomes convinced that the guy, and again, this Nazi is not a real person. Like, there was a person there because people saw Kerry talking to him, but the name he gives is not a real person, right? So there's a lot of that. That's part of why this guy gets wrapped. We don't know who this was. Kerry becomes convinced that that guy was a Fed who paid him to do this research. So there would be a bunch of writing about Hitler under the title Hitler Was Not a Bad Guy in Kerry's handwriting, and the state could put it up as a manifesto after framing him for killing JFK.
What?
I wouldn't put it past him.
Yeah, that's what Kerry starts to believe, because he's like, no one knows who this guy is. This is such a weird thing that somebody paid me to do.
Yeah.
Someone just wanted my name on this like Nazi thing so they could argue like I was involved in it. Because he also sees that what Garrison is doing is trying to like bring him into this and blame the assassination on him. So he's not, there are people in the government trying to pin the assassination on him. Yeah. But he's also locked in this conspiratorial mindset now, in part as recreation, so he kind of just starts to go crazy. Now,
yeah, that tracks.
Kerry is also at his heart a prankster. And despite the severity of the situation he is in, he cannot help himself but fuck with Jim Garrison. And I'm going to quote from the very interesting book, The Prankster and the Conspiracy, which is by that Go Rightly guy, and is a biography of Kerry primarily. Quote, sometime in 1968, during the course of the Garrison investigation, Kerry discovered that one of Garrison's aides, Alan Chapman, believed that the JFK assassination had been the work of the Bavarian Illuminati, that ancient and fraternal order much ballyhooed by right-wing conspiracy theorists such as the John Birch Society, as a centuries-old secret society behind communism and damn near every other socialist-inspired ill then corrupting the world and poisoning our precious bodily fluids. In response to all of this Bavarian Illuminati paranoia, Kerry, in the midst of Garrison's probe, decided to mindfuck Garrison all the more by sending out spurious announcements suggesting that he, Kerry, was an agent of the Bavarian Illuminati. These communiques were sent under the auspices of the Discordian Society. The mindfuck eventually got Kerry interested in the history of this mysterious secret society, and the more he read about the Bavarian Illuminati, the more fascinated he became. Eventually, Kerry and his fellow Discordian conspirators started planting stories about the Discordian Society's age-old war against the Illuminati, accusing everyone under the sun of being a member of that sinister and sneaky organization, from such politicos as Nixon, LBJ Daley, and William Buckley to Martian invaders, and various conspiracy buffs, plus members of the Discordian Society itself, which made it all very confusing and extremely hilarious. So he starts sending fake letters claiming that he's an agent of the Illuminati to one of Garrison's aides who believes that the JFK assassination was the work of the Illuminati and is actively investigating him for his complicity in that crime.
Damn.
You look, whatever you think of the wisdom and ethics of this, you have to respect that commitment to a bit.
No, I mean,
that is.
If someone's like, that'd be like if when people are like, oh, you're an evil Satanist, I'd be like, yes, I personally brought Satan back from the dead and used him to do this actual crime that happened.
I am the literal Christian devil, and I killed all those kids at that elementary school and whatever the one that started the Satanic Panic was. Yeah. I forget. Mountain Meadows no, that's the Mormon massacre. I've lost track.
Yeah,
I don't know. Whatever. By the early 1970s, Kerry Hill and Robert Anton Wilson have a name for this combination prank act of political terrorism that they've sort of lapsed into committing. They start to call it Operation Mindfuck. J.M.R. Briggs writes, "The aim of Operation Mindfuck was to lead people into such a heightened state of bewilderment and confusion that their rigid beliefs would shatter and be replaced with some form of enlightenment." Now, that may have been optimistic.
Yeah.
It is worth noting that the Discordians are not the only anarchist weirdos thinking along these lines at the time. In 1967, another group of anarchists on the UC Berkeley campus had formed a group called the Bavarian Illuminati and had started sending out weird press releases with the goal of giving conspiratorially minded people something to get paranoid about. And the lady who founds this group at Berkeley later becomes friends with Thornley and becomes a Discordian and is now a right-wing crank journalist.
Oh, no.
What? No!
This is the worst thing that's happened in this episode.
Don't worry. Something a lot worse is coming, Margaret.
Oh, no. Okay.
But also this type of stuff is not super like dissimilar to like the Situationists.
Yes, like, which we'll be chatting about them in a little bit too, which I think is useful context to give people. But yeah, Operation Mindfuck becomes a mix of deliberate paranoid incitement and anarchist political project. Some of the press releases they send out are just like conspiracy nonsense, but others are comparatively serious, where they are advocating for specific political acts. They put out a big paper urging a permanent universal rent strike, and their idea is that everyone should just stop paying rent and go about their lives as normal. So it's this mix of like, here are things we actually believe, and here's a bunch of crazy conspiracy theories. This mix of conspiratorial incitement and sincere attempts to push some political change was a conscious aping of a strategy that Greg Hill, who wrote under the name Malaclips the Younger, had come across in a book titled The Theory of Games and Economic Behavior. The authors had argued that the only strategy an opponent can't predict is a random one. Hence, what became the new religion's maxim: we Discordians must stick apart. Now, it's like what they're doing is like a thing in game theory. We do actually talk about this in the chess episodes, where like if you're like a random weirdo, like you can sometimes beat people in these games who are much better than you because you just are not acting in a way that they can possibly predict, right?
Yeah.
There are arguments that I've been reading a little bit, and forgive me, I know very little about Go, but basically one of the things that people will say is that like a good chess computer cannot be beat by humans, right? Like when it's playing it, it's like we are past the point where human beings can beat the machines in chess. But they kind of don't have computers at Go that are that reliable at beating human beings. They're good, and some of this has to do with there's just been less work in doing this with machines that play Go. But one of the things people will notice that because there are so many more possibilities in Go, human players can just do crazy shit, and the machine gets kind of tripped up, right? In a way that's not as possible with chess because there's less sort of options that you have in a game of chess than you do with Go. Anyway, I find this interesting. Not an expert on Go. Another inspiration for Thornley, Hill, Robert Anton Wilson, Robert Shea, and the other early Discordians are the Situationists, as Garrison just said. Now, these are a group of avant-garde artists and activists. They start out in France. Their basic contention, this is in like the 50s, right? Mm-hmm. So this is in the period of time and when like Greg and Kerry are like teenagers and young adults is when the Situationists are kind of at their most influential. And the basic contention that the Situationists have is that culture in the form of advertising and increasingly slick mass media is being forced upon us. The Situationists believe that you should resist cultural homogeneity with a sort of artistic judo, taking the momentum of mass media and turning it back against its wielder. Situationist art projects were supposed to have no single author or creator as they valued decentralization of creation. Artists would work together under shared names and rejected the idea of the visionary auteur. Again, you can see how this had a big influence on what Greg and Kerry and the others are doing. Key to this thinking is the idea of the spectacle. Originally defined by Guy Debord as the autocratic reign of the market economy, the media is one outward expression of the form of this autocratic reign. As Debord wrote, rather than talk of the spectacle, people often prefer to use the term media, and by this they mean to describe a mere instrument, a kind of public service. Now, this is all a little bit wonky, so I want to turn to a paragraph by Tierman Morgan and Laurie Pergy explaining the concept in more detail. Debord describes the spectacle as capitalism's instrument for distracting and pacifying the masses. The spectacle takes on many more forms today than it did during Debord's lifetime. It can be found on every screen that you look at. It is the advertisements plastered on the subway and the pop-up ads that appear in your browser. It is the listicle telling you 10 things you need to know about X. The spectacle reduces reality to an endless supply of commodifiable fragments, while encouraging us to focus on appearances. For Debord, this constituted an unacceptable degradation of our lives. And by the way, all of this stuff has a huge influence on the Wachowskis and is kind of like the basis of the Matrix movies.
Which also ties into the fact that that shit gets fucking turned around.
Yes, it sure does.
Yeah, this is one of those things where I have a lot of sympathies with the Situationists, and I like that style of praxis, but also this thing can get turned in on itself. Like you can never actually escape the loop. You can only try to loop it even tighter, and then hopefully it will collapse in on itself. But
hold on to that thought, because we haven't described the loop that Debord sets up quite yet for people. But hold on to that thought, because I want to come back to that in just a second. So Debord is convinced that art has failed and is essentially dead as a thing capable of carrying meaningful countercultural messages. And this is because the spectacle is an expert at something called recuperation, where ideas and individuals that were initially subversive are trivialized, cleansed of their revolutionary potential, and reincorporated to mainstream capitalist society as commodities. The easiest example of this is like a Che Guevara t-shirt, right? This communist revolutionary being turned into this like shirt that you buy at a head shop that's owned by a hedge fund, right?
Yeah. Or like a podcast about like cool revolutionaries in history that's like on the largest mega corporation that's ever existed.
These are all good examples, Margaret.
Yeah,
thank you.
No problem. Came up with that one off the top of my head.
The way the Situationists suggested fighting against recuperation was called determinment, which is what Garrison was talking about a little bit ago. And it is the recontextualizing of an existing work of art in order to shift its meaning towards something that inspires revolutionary feelings. Now, the Situationists are also motivated by the concept of psychogeography, which is a way of describing one's surroundings in order to like influence their emotional state. It's a little bit difficult to describe some of the Situationist art over a podcast, but one thing that they would do in Paris is they would like cut up and reshuffle maps that were then given to people in order to encourage people to wander to different parts of the city that they would not otherwise have traveled to, and thus build connections between them, right? This is kind of part of what they're trying to do here, is trying to cut what they saw as the power that maps had over how humans thought about the geography of their cities. This is also a response to the fact that city planners like set up cities in such a way to keep certain groups of people apart, right? I mean, you can think about the way this exists in whatever city you live. This is a part, like, look at the way bike lanes are always set up, right? They don't go to poor neighborhoods as a general rule. They connect affluent parts of town to affluent parts of town or places where people shop. That's not 100% of the case, but that is a lot of them, right? This is a thing that the Situationists are recognizing, and this is one of the things in which that the kind of art that they're doing is trying to fight against. Now, this all sounds very heady, but Situationist art is often credited with sparking a massive series of riots in Paris in 1968, which is right within the time period we're talking about. Now, obviously, the Situationist International kind of falls apart eventually for the same reason most left-wing movements do, but the tactics that they'd pioneered and the goal of their work gets kind of stuck in the teeth of the global left, and that's all happening kind of in the period of time before and right at the height of right at the start, at least, of what the Discordians are doing. All right, now we can talk about it, Garrison.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things that, because we've even seen, like, the Situationists tried to get ahead of that type of recuperation, and it's just a very hard thing to do. Like, it is one of those things that eventually there are attempts to even put that recuperation and commodify that even aspect of it. It's like the one of the few good jokes in Rick and Morty that I stand by is the Freedom Wafer Selects of like distilling this brain juice that gets like grown during an act of rebellion and selling that back to you so you can consume and have that same feeling of rebellion. And it's it's this mechanism that can just keep on going into itself, and trying to break out of that is, I mean, a topic of a lot of this type of political theory.
But it's this sorry, Margaret.
Oh, just like this idea that the detornment thing used to make a lot of sense to me. I grew up in ad busters and stuff, like the late 90s, early aughts.
We'll chat about them a little bit later too. But
yeah, like that was like, I was in art school and ad busters came around, and then I dropped out of art school to go travel and try and do anarchy or whatever. And these are related thoughts.
Yeah.
And the detornment and all that was a big part of it. But seeing detorment then loop so many times, I'm kind of back to just like regular direct cultural attack.
Just making art, right?
You just fucking do the things you believe in, and you say the things you believe in to people, and you just fucking try. Like, instead of the judo thing, you just punch them in the face, you know?
Margaret, I hadn't thought this until just now, but it kind of occurs to me that you can argue that the Situationists, part of what they're doing is similar to what Weishaupt was doing way back in the day. It's this thing that, like, you have to hide your message one way or the other, right? That, like, that has to be a part of it. Like, it's interesting, this, like, because I'm thinking about, like, I can remember there's a lot of folks on the left who part of, like, will celebrate, and I'm not saying this is wrong, but, like, one of the things they love about The Matrix is that it is so clearly inspired by the Situationists. Mm-hmm. Like, down to the fact that, like, at the very beginning of the movie, Neo has a copy of a book called The Society of the Spectacle, right? Like, that's,
I believe he has a Simulacra and Simulation, sorry, it's right. Yeah. Which was inspired by the writings of Society of the Spectacle.
Yeah. And so it's like, is that an example of an insurgent form of art being snuck into a massive Hollywood blockbuster, or is the Matrix itself an example of the recuperation of what the Situationists were doing, because it's this multi-billion-dollar franchise?
And then even the Matrix's rebellious messages get recuperated by fascism with the red pill.
And now Elon Musk is talking about red pills while one of the Wachowski sisters screams at him.
But then the fourth Matrix film is about the recuperation of the first Matrix film, and it's looping on itself endlessly. And this is what Operation Mindfuck is really after. It's about causing this loop to destroy people's brains and make reality incredibly malleable. Well, and that is the goal of this sort of thing.
I would argue they're not trying to destroy people's brains. And I think that, because again, the story we're building to is that this does all go terribly wrong. But I think an argument you could make if you're pro Mindfuck is that, well, the Situationists were cool, but also it would have been a real bad thing if people had believed too strongly in what they were doing and come to, like, treat these ideas of deterrent as if it is something you should take that seriously, as, like, the most effective way of fighting against capitalist modernity, and maybe getting people to think this way and start looking at these kind of loops of recuperation in which these things the Situationists created this multi-billion-dollar franchise, and then that causes people to take all of it a little bit less seriously and treat it more like a tool in the toolbox rather than something that should be the core of your personality.
Yeah, and I also feel like some of the recuperation stuff, it's like people get mad because they punch someone and then they got punched back. It's like, I'm going to do this thing that attacks capitalism. Capitalism is going to look and be like, all right, well, what's the best thing I can do? And they might try and use that back against me. Like, of course they are. We're fighting. Like, I punch them and they punch me.
And this is like, it's a conflict, and in a conflict, you learn from the actions of your adversary, which is why, ideally, like, you have this very interesting anarchist group called Up Against the Wall.
This is who I was thinking about during all this.
Cut the fence at Woodstock, which makes Woodstock what it is in a lot of ways, and then Woodstock winds up in Pepsi commercials. Life, huh?
And actually, the Situationists kicked out the British Situationists because they liked Up Against the Wall motherfuckers.
Yeah, anyway. And Up Against the Wall motherfuckers had a conflict with the... This is all...
Sorry.
We didn't need to go into all this.
But if you want, I have a whole episode of Up Against the Wall motherfuckers. Came out recently.
Excellent. Well, we are going to cover all of this in more detail lately, but I wanted to talk in this by talking about the Situationists, because as the Discordian church really starts to take off in the early 1970s, that's the goal that Thornley and Hill and Robert Anton Wilson and Bob Shea and all their friends kind of have, is to, in a very situationist manner, take the cultural weight of these conspiracy theories that the John Birch Society and the right see as a method to power, and are using still to this day as a method of power. And they are trying to, in a situationist manner, kind of like judo, turn the weight of this stuff back against itself by, as Garrison said, in some ways, kind of breaking the brains of the people who believe this by widening the field of play conspiratorially, right? Instead of the John Birch Society being the only word on the Illuminati, well, let's expand what this fucker can be well beyond what they can control. And maybe the hope is that they can't manipulate people as effectively, and that maybe people even become less manipulatable. Now, spoiler, this is debatable as to whether or not it works very well. Some people would argue that what the Discordians are about to do is build a very well-crafted gun and then leave it on a table in a room full of 4-year-olds. But we will talk about that next week. Y'all got any pluggables to plug?
Well, if you want to support people trying to use some of these same type of tactics in defense of the forest, you can donate to the Atlanta Solidarity Fund. One of the posters I saw around Atlanta about the Stop Cop City stuff, it ended with a very situationist-esque motto, which was "Reality is the battlefield." And yeah, so this type of thing is continuing on today, and it's not just people making propaganda; it's also people like doing stuff physically in the real world and facing, as the
Situationists did, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And there's people facing legal consequences for it. And if you want to support those people that are experiencing state repression, you can donate to the Atlanta Solidarity Fund.
Yes, donate to the Atlanta Solidarity Fund, and it is good to keep in mind. This is why one of the things I would like to leave liberal type folks, and I don't mean that as like a slur, but like folks who are kind of like more centrist and liberals, who we have a lot of listeners who are of that tendency. What I would like to leave you with is, the next time you hear someone on the right say something that is objectively, factually wrong and feel the desire to dunk on them, consider whether or not you're just feeding the loop, right? Because reality is the battlefield, and you may not, in fact, be able to damage their cause by locking into an argument with them, right? Yeah. That may be a doomed tactic. In the way that we're talking about a doomed tactic that is much more in line with the people that I tend to admire politically. There's no political side has a monopoly on doomed tactics. But I think it is worth saying that if arguing with conservatives about the nature of reality could change things, we would be in a different situation right now, and perhaps other tactics are necessary.
My
Margaret,
plug is for the Derive, my favorite of the situationist tactics, which is go for a walk. And go for a walk where you don't normally go for a walk. I love the idea of that as like a way to change your scope of reality. I think that they did a really good job of that. And then also I'll plug that all of the references earlier about Jamie doing all of this and that is Jamie Loftus, who has a bunch of podcasts on this very network, including My Year in Mensa, and a bunch of other ones. And then
And did Jamie do 9/11? We can't say she didn't.
I actually think we probably can. Okay.
She comes from the Northeast, Margaret.
That's true. I mean, I don't know if that's true. I
Suspicious.
True.
Suspicious.
She was in like the 3rd grade. Okay.
The 3rd grade, 9/11, 3 times 3 is 9. Sophie.
Also, didn't
too many conspiracy.
Also, like, didn't we like just read that the Illuminati was controlling the Girl Scouts? Like, they are specifically going after organizations with kids to recruit them to do these types of acts.
Powerful.
That It all makes sense now.
Because if we've learned one lesson in this series, it's that joking about this stuff never has consequences.
No consequences.
I was just so proud that Garrison got those things all in one reference.
No, that was good. That was good. All right, everybody, go make a conspiracy somewhere. You know what? I'll add to what Margaret said about taking a walk. Another anarchist thinker, Graeber,
David Graeber.
Yeah, David Graeber. One of the arguments he made was that when you're out walking in a city, as often as possible, cross somewhere other than where you're legally supposed to cross.
But look both ways.
Yeah. But look both ways. Don't get hit by a car, folks. Anyway, goodbye.
Behind the Bastards is a production of Cool Zone Media. For more from Cool Zone Media, visit our website, coolzonemedia.com, or check us out on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.